An original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Look at there. They're all on their feet for us here on this Friday morning, October the 27th. Welcome in. It's the ultimate Friday of October. And holy cow, we got a lot to talk about today. Welcome in. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics Podcast. Dave Trafford here, along with John Wright from Maru Public Opinion. Keith Leslie, you hear and see him on CH Television talking about all things Queen's Park. We will get to, we're a little bit out of our lane normally, but the fact what's going on with the provinces, the Trudeau carbon tax flip-flop. We're going to get into some suggestions from the Ontario Conservatives to put a call into the leader of the NDP in Ottawa. That kind of went off the rails. There's more to come in the Greenbelt scandal, we're told. But I'm wondering whether or not the Tories at the park are going to start calling this the Steve Clark scandal, because it just that's going to all wash on him. There's an NDP crisis at the park, but first, holy cow, this morning we wake up to news that we'd already been hearing a bit about, John Wright, that the province, Queen's Park, is considering, on track to upload the Don Valley Parkway and the Gardiner Expressway here in Toronto. If you live outside of the GTA, it probably means very little to you. But those are the two main arteries, north-south, east-west, that are maintained by the city of Toronto. They are, in all intents and purposes, highways, just like the 404, which is the northern extension of the DVP. And the 427, the QEW, which is the extension of the Gardiner Expressway. So this is a long time coming. It got poo-pooed when Anna Bilow brought it up when she was running for mayor of Toronto. Now she looks like she was right all along to do this.
Well, we also have to remember that she was in the Doug Ford camp originally. I mean, Nick Kouvelis was running her campaign, and that she was reflecting many of the things that I think she was probably involved in some options in discussion. So, you draw a straight line from her to what has now been put on the front page of the Toronto Star may be true. There's a working group about this. And so, I'd heard rumors about this some weeks ago, and the only thing that made sense to me in all of it was, besides the fact that Toronto's looking to save some money, is that it's a provincial highway and that it might create some common ground for a decision to be made. But I think the other thing that's really important here is to take a look at Mayor Olivia Chow, and to the points that we made last week. I mean, she has to be given an enormous amount of credit, and so does her staff, for bridging between the provincial government and the Toronto office with the right tone and the ability to get things done. And contrast it a little bit with John Tory's last time at the helm, where it seemed to be inevitable that things would not get done as opposed to getting done. Look at what she's accomplished in the last 2 months alone. We have the land transfer tax that's happening in the city now. Anybody over $3 million, and then that sounds like a hell of a lot of money to people outside of Toronto, but it sure isn't inside of Toronto. They're going to get dinged with 5% land transfer tax. Well, I can tell you there's lots of houses now going for 2.95 and hoping they don't go any further than that. So at least it's keeping the house prices down or lower. Next is that we've got the Shepherd Subway, which is now looking like it's going to actively turn into a loop with the rest of the subway line. And so there's a win if it comes through. We also have the uploading issue that I've said. And I think that there's going to be a couple of other issues that are unlocked around the city of Toronto. So it's not necessarily the funding per se, but the agenda itself is getting moved forward in a way that I don't think a lot of people saw coming. So there's a good bridge between the two, the provincial and the Toronto municipality. But a lot of this, I think, works well with a premier who wants to be liked, wants to have that conversation, and it may be that Anna Bilow is the bridge between Olivia Chow and the premier on all of this. So I think it's a good step in the right direction. We'll see how it all shakes out, but yeah, the headline today announced basically said there's a working group on this, and so it's more than notional. So it may come to pass.
Well, Keith, I think there's a couple of things to John's points, and that is, first, it was interesting to me that on election night, elect Mayor Chow, she said there is a place for Anna Bailão in what we're going to do moving forward. So you got to think that a lot of that, okay, there's something on the table there. There's currency, there's capital there, politically speaking. So that was one thing. But the other side of this, and I think John's right to paint a very broad picture of this, I'm hearing commentary this morning that's going to make it sound like this solves all of Toronto's problems. It does not. It sort of levels the playing field on this particular file with other municipalities. I think somebody this morning made the point, Markham doesn't pay for the 404. Toronto all of a sudden, I think it might have been Mayor Chow, that's her quote, Toronto all of a sudden pays for it south of the 401. So those things are symbolic and they're important. Over a little 10-year period, the maintenance costs are not going to put any dent in the $1.2 billion hole annually right now the city is in. But we're talking about not just restructuring the highways. We're talking about restructuring the relationship between the city of Toronto and the province, and, if need be, the feds. I think this is an important step for all involved.
Well, obviously, to John's point, I mean, these are such obvious 400 series highways, the Gardiner Expressway and the Don Valley Parkway. They connect to 400 series highways, which are, of course, provincial. Didn't Mike Harris start all this by downloading this onto the city in the first place? So let's face it, it's been the wrong place for the city to have to budget. I think it's $1.9 billion to its maintenance of just the Gardiner over the next 10 years. So no, it's not going to solve all the problems, but it's going to put a serious dent in, and it's going to alter that relationship to the point of, okay, well, there's no other major transit system in North America that relies just on fares and local taxes to pay for it. That needs a new relationship. So Olivia Chow's ability to reopen these files, maybe with some help from Anna Bailão in the background, but to get these things done, I think this is in part why perhaps we haven't heard Marit Chow be as strident as some would have hoped she'd be on Ontario Place. You've got to pick your battles, and if she's got a fairly smooth relationship getting a working group on the uploading of the highways, that's a great start. Don't keep throwing mud in Premier Ford's eye if he's willing to work with you on some major issues. But there has to be restructuring on the longer term over all this. It would be good for Ford as well. Just good publicity for them to go, you know what, this always was a provincial responsibility. It never should have been downloaded. We're taking it back up. And we're actually looking at some sort of TTC operating funds as well. This is a huge transit system. It needs support. It needs major support from both levels of senior levels of government. So I think Olivia Chow, to your point, is working this exactly as she should, even though I, for one, would like to see her be a little more strident on Ontario Place. But pick your fights.
The other thing too is it speaks to a sense in Toronto that stuff is getting done as opposed to just being talked about. You add to that then, and you might be ideologically offside with the city, putting in thousands of homes that they are going to build and they are going to potentially run because of, all the things that have happened in the past with city-run housing. But we're talking about taking advantage of the federal funding opportunity for housing as well. And so that moves along. Add to that, anybody outside of Toronto sometimes doesn't give a crap about the people who live in Toronto, even though it accounts for a huge amount of the GDP of this country. But trying to get around in the city now is impossible. Literally impossible, where even in my neighborhood, I had to turn down and off of two separate streets in a neighborhood yesterday because suddenly they're blocked off and you got to go, almost a half a kilometer to get back to a main artery. It's ridiculous. There you go. She's putting a committee together that not only is going to look at traffic, but also AI and how it could possibly move and predict where there are going to be jams around the city. So I guess the thing again that's interesting in all of this is that you can see the beginning of momentum. You can see the beginning of 4 or 5 or 6 different issues coming to bear on the city where it's going to move the city forward. And I don't know what's next on the agenda, although taxes will probably have to be looked at some point, municipal property taxes. And then there's also the parking taxes and a bunch of other stuff. But, we haven't had any discussion about tolls, which would have featured quite heavily in almost any other regime. But it seems that there's a bit of momentum now starting, and a lot of that just comes with low bridging everything as opposed to being very strident about it, or going down to Queen's Park and just talking things out. There seems to be a sense that we can get things done, and I think that's really critical for this city.
Well, there's a couple of things. First, on the Gardiner, it means that there will be no sort of ground level rearrangement of the parkway and its integration with the Don Valley Parkway. You know that the province will stick with that original plan, and we also know that there won't be tolls on either one of those roads now. So that's all out of the way and kind of free and clear. And while, yes, it's important for Toronto's bottom line, this is relief for anybody from the 905 who's driving into town. You don't have to worry.
40%, apparently 40% of the Gardiner, Gardiner and DVP are not Toronto.
Everybody
residents.
outside the 416 for sure. So those, I think, politically it salves everybody involved, and those are smart things to do. To your point, John, around taxes, we're looking at probably the first indication of what Mayor Chow will be doing as far as her budget's concerned. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. So we'll watch all of that with interest. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the NDP and, how great they were doing at Queen's Park. Keith and Marit Stiles had the cape on. She was the superhero. And this week, Kitchener Centre, the riding, issuing a letter, and I'm just going to read the final paragraph. The culmination of all of the above and your failure to nurture a sense of solidarity within the Ontario NDP community and beyond, as well as your failure to lead conscientiously with courage and principle during a complicated and dangerous time when fascism is on the rise globally, has led us to the drastic action of demanding your resignation immediately. We are also asking on all Ontario NDP riding associations across the province to join our call in asking for your resignation. Yikes.
Yeah, way to help us in that fight against Premier Ford, who just did a major flip-flop the same day on Greenbelt 2.0, reversing all those forced urban boundary expansions in Hamilton, Ottawa, Peterborough, Niagara, all over the place. And I got called for media commentary from CHCH and a couple of radio stations that I deal with, all about Sarah Jama and the NDP.
Yep.
Not about Premier Ford and the PCs backing it. This was unexpected. Remember, just a week ago when they, after they did the flip-flop on the original Greenbelt lands they've removed and then put back, they were asked, well, what about these forced urban boundary expansions? No, we're not backing down on that. A week later, they are back. Why? I mean, it raises a hell of a lot of questions, and it also is a major, major change. We found out in Hamilton as well, there was the Hamilton CBC found out that a developer's request for part of that forced urban boundary expansion, the developer's wording was used cut and paste word for word into the forced official plan changes to the city of Hamilton against the city's wishes. Hamilton City Council's asked the RCMP to look into this. Add this to your Greenbelt file. All this is going on, and what are we talking about? The NDP? Marit Stiles, your first test as leader. Apparently to some, you failed. I think Stiles was forced. She had no option here. Sarah Jama, she took a position that the leader tried to work with her on. Of course, you're allowed to criticize Israel. You're allowed to say Palestinians are being murdered or slaughtered. But the party has to have a unified front. This is a difficult issue, and we don't want people going off rogue on their own. And, of course, she repeatedly did that despite agreeing with Stiles not to do it. So I think Stiles was right. She had to take her out of the caucus. But the progressive Conservatives were absolutely wrong to vote in the legislature to censure this woman so that she cannot speak in the legislature until she apologizes in a way that's acceptable to the government. Not quite clear what that is because she did apologize at one point, but she also doubled down on her statements. Why on earth would a member, she represents 100,000 people in Hamilton Centre. She's only been elected 6-7 months. Her politics were well known before she was elected. In other words, the people of Hamilton Centre, Sarah Jama's positions on Palestine are not a big surprise. So why on earth should the government force her to, first of all, 3 days of debate on this issue, but we have no debate yet on the Integrity Commissioner's recommendation that we censure Steve Clark, the former housing minister. But no, 3 days of debate on divisive debate. The words that were used, the expressions, it's just so far over the top. all to avoid the government talking about its latest changes to the Greenbelt? And they're just continually hammering away. This is the NDP shooting itself in both feet. And the fact that they're demanding she resign, how difficult an issue is this to begin with for any leader? The federal Liberals are having trouble. The federal NDP. I mean, this is just such a fraught issue for any political party to deal with and to try and maintain unity. For the government, though, to use it just as a cudgel, to just hammer this woman and then to take away her voice in the legislature, that seems way, way, way over the top to me.
John, I don't know how you have a conversation about the Middle East without using the phrase, what about, right? I mean, there's the whataboutism about all of this that just kind of steers the conversation all over again. So I'm going to be curious to see how, what Stiles does. But, to Keith's point, if that's the strategy on the Tory benches, they, based on some reporting done by Sabrina and Angie, there's a big document dump coming in the coming days. The Toronto Star has had an FOI out looking at more documents from Steve Clark's term in office as housing minister. It sounds like it's going to be kind of nitty gritty and really raise this thing back to a boil. So, it may well overcome everything that the NDP is talking about. This story's not finished.
Well, it may be, and it may be that the Premier doesn't answer questions or show up in the House until next March or something, or beyond. I mean, and he just stays out on the hustings, and that's not a joke. I mean, he's not there to take the heat. Paul Calandra is managing this, Mr. Fix-Up, and we haven't even talked about the revision to the municipal boundaries. So this is still alive, and it's ongoing. I do want to come back to what Keith said, though, and I look at politics as setting precedents along the way. For the government to sanction this individual in the House, it's an incredible, bar to move beyond, because it can be now used on others. I mean, this is the concern, that it's not just about this issue, but it could move forward, with other members who decide that they're going to put something else up. I mean, we've now got other members of the House in the NDP who are starting to make noise on the very issue that was used in this case. And do you go one by one? Do you, to Keith's point, I mean, you've got hundreds of thousands of people who have lost their voice now as a result of this. I mean, you have the freedom to express your views in the House. It's one of the very few places where you can't get sued, and they have a majority. So this was a hammer down. And I said last week, this is, we have to remember that there are certain places within Toronto and the GTA that the Tories have a large Jewish population, and that they want to protect that base as well. But I mean, anybody who takes a side on this it's a very, very difficult position, because you can be, as we've said here, you can be against the horrific nature of what has happened in Israel with Hamas, but you can also see there it is. What about but what about the Palestinians and how that has been dealt with over the last many, many years? We've got now not just the NDP embroiled in this. We have unions embroiled in it. We have student unions embroiled in it. We have law schools embroiled in it, all around language. God, you've got lawyers who are arguing over the fine talking points, of course, but it's jeopardizing people's careers and a series of other things. I'll reiterate what I said last week. There is no polling on this. Did you notice that? There's nothing out on this. And our counterpart in the United States is the Harris poll. What's very interesting to me is that in the United States, they actually align polling companies with educational institutions, universities. So Harris is aligned with Harvard, and they put out a great piece of work this week, which would be incredibly controversial in this country, but it's a very solid piece of work. We don't have any polling company aligned with any academic institution in this country. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that you get in, because I've been through this, where academics complain about the minutiae of sampling and word composition and all of that, when in fact, you see academic freedom in the United States. But there's nothing where, you get a sense of consensus in this country. There's nothing where you can actually say and point to, well, 90% of Canadians are offside with Hamas, but there's also 65% of Canadians who are onside with the Palestinians for this. Like, you don't have any way of splitting the atom on this. And I think this is going to continue to be the case. And we're just, I follow what's going on, just like many others, very, very closely. We're getting ready for the big push. And, with the Israeli defense forces moving into the Gaza, if you think it's hot in the kitchen right now, it's going to be really boiling potentially in the next week.
Yeah. Well, and it's even interesting in terms of the way media has covered it. On the one hand, for example, and they're not the only ones, the New York Times pointing out that they used the headline right away that it was Israel that bombed the hospital and then had to walk it back, properly so. So there's a whole, issue here in terms of cautious journalism, and I think there has to be to some degree. But boy, it even becomes fraught in terms of how do you, to your point, John, how do you cover the story now in a balanced and meaningful way with context, with background, when nobody really wants to hear context or background?
You stand there in a fog bank because that's all your news is.
Right.
The fog of war rolls in instantly now with social media. And we've seen this from the very start about the dead babies that Hamas slaughtered, and right on through to the hospital, and on everything we're hearing and saying is not only whataboutism. There's like 5 sides, 5 different people are just claiming this, claiming that. So the reporting we're seeing, despite the high-priced network talent being flown in to help us all, is really, you can only get one side of this. You can only talk to one side at one time.
Right.
And they'll give you the whataboutism because this is why they're justifying what their actions are. But there's no way to properly report on this without just literally saying, we know virtually nothing for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what we are told. We've seen video of this. We can't confirm the videos or, all these things. So then what are we doing? What on earth are we bringing to this? And that's why I go back to the whole point of having a debate in the Ontario legislature on this was just fraught with danger and led only to more anger at home, more, assaults and verbal attacks against Jewish people and against Muslim people at home. So what is the purpose of this?
Again, to double back to the sanctioning part, does this mean that if the government, the majority of the day, doesn't like what you say on any matter, that they can gang up and they can censor you on that? Now, I mean, we're taking it to an extreme because it's not going to happen, perhaps very often. But the other thing that I notice out of all of this here is the fact that people at the grassroots level are now involved in some of these issues to the point that there is an emboldening of action. So on the one hand, and I don't want to equate the two, but on the one hand, we have lots of protests now. We have boycotts of various restaurants versus those who want to get in and have a latke and show that they support, the restaurant, all that sort of stuff. We also have individuals who are saying, where's the police in all of this? Well, God knows. I mean, if you have 5,000 people clustered at Yonge and Bloor in downtown Toronto at 8 o'clock at night, you can only imagine what would happen if the police stepped in with batons and horses to deal with that. You'd have every window down Yonge Street and around the area smashed and looted potentially, with a whole bunch of people reacting to that. So the police are bound to it. But again, I don't want to equate this, but you see issues like Ontario Place now. Okay, so that, again, I don't want to equate the two, but there's an emboldening of action among grassroots people. The reversal on the green belt issue has given rise to now community groups deciding that they can go after the government, that they can get involved, that they can demand things to take place. And I don't know where it's going to end up at the end of the day, but there's when the cork is popped from the bottle on things like this, it has a series of other touch points that can be triggered. And I do think that this is now giving rise to areas of civilian involvement, voter involvement, on not only the one that we're seeing most visibly on the Israeli-Palestinian circumstance, but on others as well. There's an atmosphere. It's a little bit like having natural gas that floods your home without the marker in it. You can't smell the sulfur in it, and it has the potential to explode in a number of different ways if there's a spark. So I think you have to look back. You have to look broader on this as well, that this has got a number of different civilian fronts. People moving. Even in our neighborhood, there's a backlash against something that's happening in the neighborhood. There's a petition that's got 80% of the people on this street involved. 80%. And there seems to be this sense in the air that citizens can do something, and they are angry. They're angry.
But what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that?
I think the unions are as well. We see the unions are in power. That's like people power, isn't it?
Yeah,
Did you see what the Ford workers got?
What's wrong?
Nothing's wrong with this. It's the reversal of power. It's what it should be. It's putting the power in the people's hands. When you see the Ford workers getting 25% over Ford, that's showing what can be done, that the companies are making money. We can get a share of that. To your point, John, it's all about emboldening people to just feel we can make a difference. We can make changes here. And in all aspects of society. I mean, if the rich are getting super rich, they need to start sharing that wealth. And so the whole issue of, getting the supermarkets down, bringing affordability to that, the government's fraught with it, but it's another one of the issues they know they have to deal with because people are pissed off about many things and they're willing to take action about many things. The local manager of the Walmart here in my small town in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, large part of his day is spent watching people steal from them.
Yeah.
Because they're forced to the wall. And so the people, if they're taking that action, they also want to take other. They want society made better, and they're tired of governments hiding things from them, lying to them, and misleading them about all kinds of things.
Okay, so then let me ask you this: based on that, is the Trudeau government's walk back on the carbon plan the right thing here, or is this just crass politics, Keith? Because he was.
Well, it's crass politics,
but he's he's responding exactly to what you're talking about. There is a cost
he is, but what about
here.
all the people that heat their homes with natural gas? He's only doing the people that heat their homes with oil, which happens to be where? Oh, where I am in Atlantic Canada, where there is no natural gas. So most of the people are using oil to heat your home here, and so they're going to get a break, but not the people in Northern Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan. How come? This is because they have 24 of the 32 seats in Atlantic Canada, and they're tanking. Their numbers are through the floor. So this is very obviously crass political opportunism. But I also think, to our points about empowering people, empowering the provinces, he's going to have to come back and take this off, the carbon tax off that natural gas for home heating as well. It's just, you could just see this coming. Why they didn't do it right away? Because now it just looks like, as we say, crass political. You're trying to save those seats in Atlantic Canada. And how long is this? It's for till just after the next election. Thank you very much. So it couldn't be more obvious. And it also, I think, it gives the other provinces, including Ontario, a very solid argument. What about us? What about our people who live in very cold rural climates? Let's face it, outside the GTHA, people have to go great distances in Ontario to go to work, to go to school, to do all sorts of things, get to medical appointments. In other words, they don't have the alternatives that they do in the big cities for not spending all the money on gasoline, which is up again this week.
Well, part of that is also the incentive for heat pumps and geothermal heating. There's all that.
The whole
that
heat
program.
pump idea is
but
great.
Here's the interesting thing: is all of a sudden by doing this, he's thrown the rock into the mud puddle, and it's really hard to figure out whether you should be for or against it, because you've got environmental groups saying, that's a good idea because we can put money into heat pumps, which is more environmentally friendly and blah, 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 blah. But what does it mean around the edges? So, again, maybe even to the Ford strategy, John, this distracts from the issue at hand. And particularly, as you pointed out in the past few weeks, they're in serious trouble in Atlantic Canada. But does this regional bump, is that going to make a difference? Does that actually help the cause? And again, there's still some runway to go here.
Well, for the sake of repeating myself last week and the week before, for all these people who talk about the polls and where they are, and look, I've got friends of mine who have dismissed the Trudeau government. They're the same people who might be dismissing the Ford government at this a month ago. But right now the Ford government has bounced back in the polling, and you have to say to them, well, the next election's in 2026 in this province. You look at precisely what Keith has said. I mean, I said to a friend of mine who was absolutely sure that Trudeau is completely cooked, and he may well be, but I said, call me in June of this coming year, because he'll have about another year and a bit to go in the mandate, and let me know, because the NDP, who's also going down in the polls, the NDP that's also losing a grip, and possibly will lose even more when the ad for Yorkdale gets out with Jagmeet Singh standing in a tailored suit with a gold, looks like almost a gold Rolex on. Like, I mean, for goodness sake, what are you thinking? Where they're not going anywhere. I mean, they're not going to sign their own death warrant. So we're here for a while. So, Dave, this was crass politics. Ottawa always seems to be about 48 to 72 hours behind everything. Like I said, that bubble is like the Iron Dome, right? Like just kind of off stuff comes in and gets belted out of the way, and then it's kind of like 72 hours later, the Prime Minister standing up saying, "Hey, I hear you. We listened." Well, I should have been listening the same weekend that the Deputy Prime Minister was standing in Prince Edward Island and got absolutely pummeled by not only the press there, but then the premiers in Maritimes who said, "Are you kidding me? You're talking about taking a subway in Atlantic Canada?" So I think time is on the side of all politicians, because you don't know what's going to happen. Look, the leader of the NDP in Ontario was riding high hugely 2 weeks ago. Look where she is today, under siege from her own party. Having said all of that, I really do think that we're still a long way from the rise of the Ontario legislature at Christmas time. Okay, so we're still quite a distance away from that. But they've got to be counting the days. In those old Bugs Bunny cartoons where you had the hand ripping off the days, all the way to the end. There's somebody there with an advent calendar for the Tories in the legislature, kind of ripping away the doors to take out the little whiskey bottles instead of the chocolates, because they want to get out of that so they can get beyond and into the spring where they can bring in a budget that changes course. But to Keith's point, the issue with the municipal boundaries is really something to watch. The reversal on that raised a flag in my mind that there's potentially way more to come here. And if that's the case, then it's just going to, pervade the spring session potentially as well.
All right. So I just want to just a note from the legislature at Queen's Park. There's always a chance. It's fun to have the back and forth in question period. And Paul Calandra is a master at it in terms of taking on the opposition. But there are some days when you can be just too cute by half.
And you know what else you can do? Call your friend in Ottawa, Mr. Singh, Jagmeet, 1-800-JAGMEET.
Welcome to 1-800-FREE-SEX. If you are a man seeking a woman, press 1. If you are a woman seeking a man, press 2.
Colin DeMello called that line, did he?
If you are a man seeking a man, press 3. If you are a woman seeking a woman, press 4.
I did call it. It's a sex line.
Oh, no. I would hope that they didn't know that was the case.
Yeah, that's Colin DeMello, our friend at Queen's Park from Global News, and he actually he did a Keith Leslie, I thought. He picked up the phone and actually called it and said, what does that mean? And if you saw the video of him kind of doing the reveal to Marit Stiles, it was hilarious. It was, in her week, I expect that as goofy as it was much wanted relief.
There's a smile there at
everything that went on. So, you might want start throwing those numbers around. You might want the staff just to kind of check that out before you put that on the record unanswered.
One more thing to smile about before we go, I know we got to wrap up, is the government this week, apparently in a note to municipalities, suggested that a long-term care bed will be a home in counting towards their goal of building so many homes.
What?
Oh, yeah. And so someone come back with, well, why would they do this? Well, right now, developers are the only ones exempt from the development fees. If you extend it to a long-term care bed being a home, now private operators of long-term care beds would get the same developer exemptions from developer fees.
I don't understand.
I don't know if that's true.
Can you explain this one to me? Because my mind is just kind of, I'm sorry, I don't understand that.
A long-term care bed would be equal to a home under the government's goal of 2.5 million, 10 million, whatever the number of millions of homes is they want to build. So this long-term care, if a long-term care bed becomes a home, then right now only developers are exempt from the development fees locally. if you have a private operator of a long-term care home who's now going to be building homes instead of beds, they would be apparently eligible for that same exemption from the developer fee.
Yikes. That's crass
Now,
politics.
that's one person's interpretation. I'm not confident in that, but apparently the government has said in its calculations a long-term care bed is going to be equal to a home, and I guess in a sense, it's true.
It's a residence.
Well, if you live in your bed, maybe that's what it's called, but wow, that's really stretching it, isn't it?
A little bit. And it's crass in as much as we look at the history of long-term care over the last 10 years in this province or more, and the way it's gone, and then to somehow kind of use it as a solution for the housing crisis.
Minister Calandra just came from, long-term care. This man has got everything juggling on in his head, and they're looking at some bold and innovative ways. And yeah, it depends on how you message everything, doesn't it? Wow. We're meeting our housing goal by counting long-term care beds. So it'll be interesting to see.
Well, interesting is at least what it might be. So listen, Keith, John, have a great weekend, and we'll keep an eye on things and talk to you next week.
Take care.
Take care.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.